Cape Cod Broadcasting weaves the listening environments of 99.9 WQRC, Ocean 104.7, WFCC Classical 107.5, Cape Country 104, and CapeCon.com's website experience to reflect the lifestyles of the people who live, work, and play on Cape Cod. We hope that you enjoy this podcast.
This is Sunday Journal. I'm Dan McCready. So far this winter, 2 major winter storms have rolled through the area. While most of the attention is focused on how humans fare, our animal friends in this situation can face even more dire situation with injuries and other trauma befalling them. Joining me today is Deborah Robbins-Millman, Director of the Cape Wildlife Center in Barnstable, and Lynn Miller, Director of Wildlife Rehabilitation at Cape Wildlife Center, who will discuss the challenges that animals face during these major storm events. And thank you both so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having us.
So, first of all, let's just start off with what are some of the major concerns when it comes to wildlife during a major winter storm like we just had?
Well, Lynn can address specifics per species, but we see a lot of injuries. When there's snow and there's blowing winds, we're getting birds that strike buildings, animals hit by cars, animals succumbing to the cold. So typically this time of year we get a lot of cold-related injuries, trauma, and also seabirds that are blown offshore.
Oh, so, yeah, because seabirds are always a major issue. They find seabirds.
Yeah, this time of year we're going to see gannets and all sorts of other seabirds that the wind just blows them in from the ocean and then they get stranded. What some people don't realize, and you could probably address this too, is a lot of these birds, they can fly but they can't walk. So they'll get blown offshore, they'll land in your front yard, and literally they're stranded there. There's nothing they can do until someone picks them up and physically brings them in.
That's right. Most of these birds spend all their lives on the ocean and only come ashore to breed. So they're only onshore for maybe 6 weeks maximum, and that's off and on. Again, sometimes they're incubating, sometimes they're out feeding on the ocean. So their structure is quite different to a normal bird that we would see in our backyards.
And the plus side is a lot of times they're not injured. We'll get a call and someone will say, there looks like there's a little penguin in my yard and it can't fly. And we'll say, okay, first thing, it's not a little penguin.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's a dovekie, which does look quite a lot like one, and more than likely perfectly healthy. Just needs a little helping hand to get back to the water because it's not going to be able to take off from your front yard. So,
of course, we have to rule out any possible injury first, which means they need to come to us and be evaluated. We can do a quick physical exam, pop them in our seawater pool, which is pretty exciting because we can put them back into what would be a natural environment for them. Just evaluate their behavior within that environment. If they're diving, they look healthy, their waterproofing is in good condition, then we can get them back into their own habitat as soon as possible.
Yeah, it's always better to be safe, definitely. Even if they look perfectly fine, we'll run some blood work and make absolutely positively sure before we let them go again.
Yes, even with some of the blows that they've had, if you think they can even get small liver lacerations, which would cause them to become somewhat anemic, then that means that we might need to hold them for a couple of days, perhaps give them some iron to help them build up their blood count again, and then we can get them on their way.
Now, we've been obviously talking a lot about birds here. Are they the animals that are the greatest risk during storms like this? Are they the ones in the most danger?
Mostly. That's who we see mostly. We'll occasionally see a fox or a bird of prey that's been, swooping too low and gets hit by a vehicle. But seabirds, probably this time of year, you'd say seabirds are the most?
Seabirds would certainly account for the more interesting cases that we get in, if I can say so, because often you get birds in that we don't expect to see. And they're quite a treat for us as well because they're absolutely beautiful, and especially the males at this time of the year are in their breeding plumage. They're stunning.
You never know with the snow. Last year we got a pelican in.
Oh.
Which a big storm came, and he was born in Virginia and was trying to fly south for the winter, and the wind had other ideas, so we ended up with a pelican. So this is an exciting time of year for us.
It certainly is, and we have a couple of really cool patients in at the moment that have been having problems with the winter, so we have a lot of fun. But it's also challenging because their diets are very specific and their needs are very specific, so we try to be very much aware of just the different wrinkles that we need to add to our care protocols.
And it's interesting with these injuries, too, that I think a lot of people would assume that when it comes to wild animals, that they're built for this. They've got all the protection that they need, and they're adapted. They've got whatever they need to make it. They're used to living out in the wild, and they should be fine. And that these injuries, like frostbite in particular, I was surprised to see as a major concern.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people just assume that's a human issue, and that this wouldn't affect these wild animals because, like I said, they're prepared for this. They're in a sense made for this.
Yeah, it's usually a double whammy. There'll be something else that causes them. Recently, we took in a seagull that had some cold issues, but it was because he had been hit by a car. The air sac was ruptured. He couldn't fly, and then he found himself grounded, and then that's when the frostbiting issue came in.
That's exactly right. And the other issue, of course, is that we are seeing climatic shift, which means that species that would never have really been here for any prolonged period are now staying around or are moving into areas that they may get caught in when we have these more extreme weather events. So they're somewhat displaced from what you would expect to see them in their normal annual cycle. So that adds to the whammy. And so in many ways, you can still say this is an anthropogenic or human-related injury that is coming into us.
And this winter's been weird, too, because it was freezing and then warm. So they kind of get fooled into thinking that it's okay to stick around, and then it gets cold again. So,
and now since we're speaking of this area, what are some of the risks that are perhaps unique to Cape Cod that these animals will face and that you guys would have to deal with that maybe people in other parts of the state wouldn't be dealing with?
I think the whole thing with us is that northeasterly wind, because the Cape Cod Bay acts as a trap. So birds that may be out on the open ocean may be being blown with that northeasterly into the Cape Cod Bay, maybe get into shallow waters, also become somewhat they've used up all their energy or a great amount of their energy stores, so getting back out into the open ocean may be a bit of a challenge. And also if you're already somewhat down, something's happened, whatever, you've been banged around in the storm, then you're in this a catchment area really for these animals that have injuries or are just simply a bit low because of the storm. So we don't see that in any other way. We're a very unique environment from that perspective.
And the islands are a challenge too, because we'll get injured wildlife, and we're very lucky we have a partnership with Cape Air and also Offshore Animal Hospital, but an animal will get injured in Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard, and really there's very limited resources for them there. But in Nantucket, we have a vet clinic that treats them and then puts them on a Cape Air flight and sends them over to us. So that's really fortunate for us, too.
Mm. No, they're just wonderful to have that resource available to us and to the wildlife. And these are people who really care and are very passionate.
Now, I've also got to ask, too, is one type of storm more dangerous or more of an issue than maybe another type would be?
Yes. Those nor'easters, it's because they're bringing birds in from a very unique environment. You've got the open ocean and the currents, the northern currents that are bringing food up just offshore. You also have the upwelling area, which means that there is food being brought to the surface, which helps feed a lot of those seabirds. So you get those northeasters pulling them in, pushing them further and further into the Cape Cod Bay. That's a pretty unique sort of storm. Otherwise, when we see winds coming from other directions, we will sort of take a deep breath and say, oh, thank goodness, not this time. But you do know those nor'easters are going to bring us some interesting cases and some big challenges.
And now when you find out about these, usually it's brought to your attention by a concerned citizen who sees an injured animal, like you said, maybe in their front yard or somewhere else, and they want to respond, which is a good thing, that they want to help the animals. But if they're not careful, it can be a problem.
Yeah, you do have to handle animals with care, especially the seabirds this time of year. Long beaks, there can be some injuries to people. We always advise if you're going to handle a seabird or any bird that you think might be of bite, and most of them do. I mean,
yeah, so they've got long pokey beaks.
Yeah, is to put on some glasses, sunglasses, protective glasses, gloves if you have them, and then ideally wrap them in a towel, which keeps them, they feel a little more secure, and it also keeps the feet and the beak, less likely to be an injury.
Covering their head really helps just reduce the stress, because we are predators, and we know that, and they know it because our eyes are in the front of our face. So they know that there's a predator coming for them. So it's very frightening as well.
Right. You're thinking you're a good Samaritan, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm injured, and here comes somebody who's going to take advantage of that.
That's right. The only time most birds are ever held is to be eaten. If you think about it, the only time a bird is ever held by something is when it's going to make a snack of it. So it's very frightening when you think of it from the bird's perspective. So we need to be sensitive to it, so covering their face. And also the most important thing, though, is your protection. Human safety is the most important part of this whole equation.
Yeah, we see a great deal of rabies vector species, raccoons, bats, that kind of thing. Now, if you find something like that, your safety is paramount. Never touch them with bare hands. Always make sure that you have a box or container to safely transport them in.
And one thing I saw as a piece of advice was to bring the animal inside if you find it like in the dead of night. But that also is a concern because in a home, of course, you got people and you probably got pets that are living there too.
Right.
That could put the household in danger.
Yeah, something ideally would be like a laundry room, something you can close off. The pets and children especially are not going to get anywhere near it, and the animal will feel a sense of security and not be cold. Because, leaving them outside is... The temperature's too cold for an injured animal. They won't have anywhere to go to get away from it, so...
It takes a lot of energy from that animal just to deal with the damage that has been done to it. So whatever injuries that are going on, you need to help counteract the amount of energy it takes to take care of the pain, the stress that it's under, if it's not getting calories going in. So that way, if you keep it inside, at least it doesn't have to keep itself warm.
And we tell people, they say, what can I feed it? You really don't have to worry about that. The animal just needs time to rest and can do without food and even water in most cases until the following day.
Yes, and as soon as we get them in, we can actually give fluids in different ways, just the same as you would if you went into an emergency room in a dehydrated condition. The first thing the physicians will do is pop an IV line in. We can do very similar techniques or use very similar techniques to rehydrate these animals rapidly and get them moving towards stability.
People are amazing. Some of the rescues have been just phenomenal. I can't believe how they've managed to do it. We had this woman, was she in her 80s? She called and said there was an injured hawk in her backyard, and we said, oh my gosh, be very careful. And she brought it in about a half hour later, and she had gotten her 90-year-old neighbor to help her out. So, it's properly done. Oh, anybody can do a rescue. It's just you have to use the right techniques. And
that's what makes us soar with our spirits soar. It's just the public, the people who care enough to pick up these animals and bring them into us.
And they drive sometimes 90 minutes from beyond Boston because there's not a lot of wildlife centers around. And it's amazing what people will do for animals. It's really heart.
Makes us feel good.
Touching. Yeah.
And it's also suggested, too, that you could call your local animal control or all-night vet clinics, apparently. There are
some. We have a partnership with CARE, which is a wonderful group, and they'll take animals during the night, and then we'll pick them up in the morning. And then animal control, most of them will go pick up during the daytime.
We're very fortunate to have such a wonderful group of people working in animal control on the Cape. And we're working with them in terms of their education as well, and we learn from them. So it's a two-way street. And these are people who are skilled and know the deal, basically. They know how to handle these situations, to do it carefully and to respect human safety.
We are lucky. That is one thing the Cape, I think, is far and away. The animal control officers are very responsive, and they handle wildlife.
Yes.
I've worked with animals for, 20 years now, but a lot of animal controls will only hire dogs and cats. They'll only handle dogs and cats. So we're lucky we have that resource because we could never cover the Cape. We only have 6 staff members, so we rely on people bringing the animals to us.
So, like, even in many towns, even like you said, the professionals, they just don't have that experience with the kind of wildlife we're talking about here.
Right. They don't have the training, or they don't have the inclination, or they're just too tied up. We have some amazing ones. There's a woman in Provincetown that's astronomical, and several of the other ones, too. They really go above and beyond.
Yeah. They are another group of people that just make you soar when they come in. They usually have a smile on their faces, and they're
bring
concerned.
Bring us coffee, what's not to like.
Totally wonderful people.
Yeah.
Now, we've been focusing most of this conversation on what to do after the fact. What to do when you see an injured animal. Is there anything that can be done preemptively or ahead of time to make things maybe a little bit easier for the wildlife that an everyday person can do?
Yeah. Now, first thing, after a storm, anytime, but especially after a storm, drive with extreme caution because you're going to have animals flying low. There'll be species that are not necessarily in their familiar neighborhood, so that's very important. There's also things you can do year-round, like we have decals for windows so that birds are less likely to strike them. And when you get into the car, I know this is a particular problem for domestic animals, but wildlife as well. If it's cold enough, they may try and get warm in or around the vehicle.
Plus, the vehicle is a safety place. Last night, or the night before last, actually, we got called out to a duck that was down in the car park just outside the mall. And it just so happened that Brittany, one of our technicians, and I were on duty, and we were able to pop over and have a look. And sure enough, there was a hooded merganser that somebody had spotted sitting under a car. And so we eventually managed to catch it.
Shelter.
Yes.
If you don't look
So
could have been run over.
Have a look around. Beforehand, basically it boils down to a lot of the seabirds you're not going to make any difference with. They're going to turn up or they're not. But your own wildlife, keeping growing species of trees and shrubs that complement the wildlife around, that add to the environment, that enrich the environment here. Great idea. Reduce your use of herbicides and pesticides by growing native species or natural species that have naturally resistance to various issues such as drying out and, of course, being invaded by other exotic plants. As Deb mentioned, decals for your windows, making sure if you do have an apparent flyway through your house, reduce the likelihood that these birds will see it as a flyway and try and bang into things on their way through.
And for larger birds of prey or coyotes, fox, that kind of thing. If you have a cat especially, it's important to keep them indoors.
Yes.
People don't realize what an attraction that is for wildlife, and that's not good for anybody. So.
Yes, and cats really, do live long, healthy lives as indoor animals, and they do catch a lot of pretty nasty diseases out there when they're allowed to be outside. Plus, they also are a huge impact on wildlife. We know that some 25 to 30% of all admissions to wildlife rehab centres are directly the cause of injuries from cats, and that's for mammals and birds. So we know that they have a profound impact on the local environment.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I did want to thank you both so much for coming in today and discussing this very important issue with us, and thank you both so much. It's been very informative, and it's been a pleasure, so thank you.
Thank you. And, of course, call us anytime, for questions, advice. We'll be glad to help.
And, of course, we're running our rehab, Introduction to Rehab course, and a volunteer program is going to be coming up very soon. So let us know if you're interested in coming and joining us.
All right. Well, my guests today were Deborah Robbins-Millman, Director of the Cape Wildlife Center in Barnstable, and Lynn Miller, Director of Wildlife Rehabilitation at Cape Wildlife Center. For more tips on how you can help local wildlife, visit fundforanimals.org. I'm Dan McCready, and this is Sunday Journal.
This podcast is a presentation of Cape Cod Broadcasting, which is solely responsible for its content. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit us at capecodbroadcasting.com.